This is Dominique Galbraith, and I'll be reading a blog post that I wrote back in October of 2020 on my new Black Power Movement blog. I remember growing up in the 90s thinking how strange it was that almost every black male rapper in the prime of his career ended up with a charge, did some time in prison, and made music glorifying it. I wondered if this was some sort of rite of passage. Heck, it almost seemed like a ritual. I questioned how did black mass incarceration, which left families and communities devastated and negatively impacting generations, become something to embrace and normalize. I was speaking at an event earlier this year that I hosted, and the topic was breaking generational curses. As I spoke passionately about what God put in my heart to share, I went off script and asked the question, why are we glorifying dysfunction and the worst aspects of our culture and defining them as, quote, blackness? I began to talk about colored people's time, which was code for being late, and other habits that, though they exist in other cultures, they are not embraced as cultural norms in those communities. This revelation led me to the question, who is defining what it means to be black? Or better yet, who has redefined it? As I entered this journey on a quest to get a better understanding of politics in America and the black community, I realized a few things about black culture, white liberals, and their toxic relationship. I discovered that owners of the largest media companies, including some record labels that produce hip-hop, have part ownership in the private prison industry. I learned that major record companies investing millions of dollars into promoting music with violence, drug use, and misogynistic messages in hip-hop are owned by white liberals. I realized that majority of the media and the entertainment marketed towards the black community portray the worst stereotypes of black people and are owned or sponsored by white liberals. If the head of the most influential companies, media and entertainment outlets are owned and run by white liberals, then it is them who is shaping and defining what it means to be black in mainstream society. Here's a quote. The same people disproportionately incarcerated when exposed to the criminal justice system are at every turn inundated with media normalizing incarceration to the point that wherever there is mainstream hip-hop music, reference to imprisonment as an ordinary, even expected component of life is sure to follow. End of quote. From Homeboy Sandman of raprehab.com. This type of racism is the most destructive because it destroys from the inside out. This type of racism is the most impactful because it uses our image, diction, and desire to embed toxic ideas and norms into our culture. It is far more destructive than any Confederate flag-waving white man we are made to fear. This infiltration and redefining of blackness has helped to destroy black families while they build generational wealth and monetize our pain and demise. When white liberals label things like hard work, preparing for the future, and being on time as whiteness, these are principles that critical race theory teaches. They are helping to destroy the people they claim to want to help with habits that will work in direct opposition to financial independence and progress. To add to that, the majority of the school systems in predominantly black communities are run by liberal Democrats who have failed to properly equip underserved children to compete in society. I find it very strange that liberal Democrats are supposedly leading the fight against income inequality while failing miserably to tackle the disparities in education. One may argue that they mean well but haven't figured it out. I disagree. I think some of our everyday Democrats/liberals do mean well. But I firmly believe that those at the top calling the shots don't mean well at all. How can a group of people financially invested in our destruction be interested in our advancement? The mismanagement of funds and lack of accounting for funds designated to help black communities in liberal Democrat-run cities are corrupt and oppressive. The failure to equip our children to compete with theirs is white supremacy. The marketing of abortion as a solution for women of color who can't afford to care for their child they are carrying is genocide. The positioning of black faces as the poster children of sin is demonic. Our men are perceived to be thugs, or in other words, criminals. Our women are perceived to be bitches and hoes, in other words, sexually immoral. Always late, always broke or materialistic, in other words, poor managers. I saw a young black man who decided to become a Republican, responding to the backlash that he faced by pointing out the fact that a black man could come out as gay and be celebrated, but a black man can come out as Republican and be called a sellout or told, "You ain't black." We are the only group of people in this country that does not have the freedom to express a political view outside of liberalism without being denied our cultural identity. It is no coincidence that those that don't happen to be black, but are decision makers on what qualifies as blackness, are leading these attacks. And we stand by in ignorance sometimes and help them tear down our brothers and sisters. A liberal white woman adopting 2 black boys and raising them as girls gets overlooked. But a white conservative woman who adopts 2 black children, raising them with conservative values, is demonized and called a bigot. The principles that are demonized in pop culture by labeling them conservative, aka racist, coincidentally are the same principles that most ethnic groups have had as foundational. These values enable them to build strong families and many to build generational wealth. Conservatism is not just an American political ideology. It is a system of values based on basic morality, which is not strange or foreign to mankind. The intentional and systematic steering of black culture away from basic moral values that has sustained and advanced cultures and families throughout history is true racism. By true, I mean the most detrimental to our existence. How did black people, who were traditionally conservative in almost every nation that exists, yet in this country embrace liberalism? Like I said in my book, because liberals, have put a white racist face on our values and told us that this is what racism looks like. So whenever we hear the word conservative, white, Confederate flag carrying Bible thumpers come to mind. Not all conservatives are racist, and not all liberals are pro-black. But there is an ideology that is pro-black, and that is conservatism, because it is most closely of all political persuasions and value systems in alignment with God's standard. The same liberals that want to equate morality and conservatism to whiteness are the same people that want to equate black to sin. In the book of Numbers, chapter 23 to 25 in the Bible, when Satan realized he could not curse the children of Israel through Balaam, his next course of action was to tempt them to sin. At that point, he didn't need to curse them to see their downfall. They brought destruction on themselves by disobeying God. Here's a quote. The liberal elements of whites are those who have perfected the art of selling themselves to the Negro as a friend of the Negro, getting sympathy of the Negro, getting the allegiance of the Negro, and getting the mind of the Negro. Then the Negro sides with the white liberal, and the white liberal uses the Negro against the white conservative, so that anything that the Negro does is never for his own good, never for his own advancement, never for his own progress. He's only a pawn in the hands of the white liberal. The worst enemy that the Negro have is this white man that runs around here drooling at the mouth, professing to love Negroes and calling himself a liberal. And it is following these white liberals that has perpetuated problems that Negroes have. That's a quote from Malcolm X. Not only has liberal policies failed us, but liberal ideology is also contrary to the standards that God has set for his people. Interestingly, the word liberal means free. But this is Satan's definition of free. Because when we give into temptation to do anything that we please, we find ourselves in spiritual bondage. Black culture is being used to reinforce systematic oppression. Modern day oppression is not whips and chains. It is psychological and spiritual. This form of enslavement is more cunning and, to be frank, insulting to our God. Why? Because he intended for his chosen to be the light on the earth. God's people in biblical accounts were blessed. They were well endowed. They lived in safety. They were feared by the surrounding nations. Their favor was obvious. No nation could conquer them or enslave them unless they turned from God. God chose Israel as a nation so that he could display his glory to the other nations on earth, and that they would know that he is King of Kings. He wanted the nations that served false gods to know that his ways were better and to appeal to and show his love to all mankind. In other words, God wanted to show off through you. This is your heritage. We are so much more than what the powers that be have promoted us to be. It is the reason why we are more than happy to share stories of Black entrepreneurs succeeding. It is the reason why we see hashtag Black love and we love it, and Black fathers, hashtag Black fathers, on our newsfeed. They are not just hashtags, but some of the ways our community has worked to change the narrative of who we are and how we are represented in our society. Why do stories of Black people doing positive things include the caption, "What they don't show you in the media"? It's time to take things a step further in taking control of who or what defines Blackness. We must continue to take control of our narrative and stop supporting media outlets that monetize our stereotypes, pain, and destructive images. This involves us denying ourselves by turning down roles and opportunities that, though they may enrich us personally, it means harm to the community. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Do we have the faith to believe that if we turn down acting gigs, songs, and other forms of media and entertainment that will negatively impact our people, that God won't come through in a major way? Do your dreams and advancement have to come at the expense of perpetuating destructive ways within the culture? With God, it may take longer. But with God, your breakthrough comes with good success and peace. We must also demand more from our leaders and those who claim to represent our interests. It's not enough to march and show up when a Black man gets killed. It's not enough to show up every 4 years and blindly tell us to go vote with no real plan or effort to educate us on policy and its implications. Racism in this nation is deeper than police brutality, and we certainly need more than just Black faces in positions of power who may not represent what is in the best interests of their people. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 14. There is much talk about the Black community, its current state, and what needs to be done. While many have ulterior political motives for bringing this conversation to the forefront of society, God has a bigger plan. I believe that his plan is for us to not only seek out real solutions, but to seek him. Since we are God's chosen, then the solutions won't simply come because we chose the right politicians or just because we protested. It will take a turning back to our God and his ways. This is Dominique Galbraith, and I'll be reading a blog.